So they're doing that, and they're doing that with great success. The casualty ratios that are coming out during the summer, were 10, 15 to 1 on occasion. I mean, it's just ridiculous how the Russians are doing this. But there was another thing happening. And I talked about this in May. I did an interview with a guy named Garland Nixon. He's a radio personality here in the United States, well known, well respected. And Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst, was on with me. And I brought up the Lend-Lease program policy that the United States Congress was getting ready to pass, and Biden said he was going to sign. And we're talking that, it represented at that time around $53 billion worth of military assistance and other assistance, on top of the money that's already been given to them, and on top of the money that Europe and NATO had been providing. And then you combine this new weaponry coming in with the strategic depth that NATO is providing to allow Ukrainian forces to leave Ukraine, go to Europe, get trained without fear of any attack, and then come in with new equipment. As Russia was grinding down the Ukrainian army, and let's just be honest, Russia defeated the Ukrainian army this summer. They literally destroyed the vast majority of the existing Ukrainian arsenal of weaponry, their tanks, their artillery, their armored vehicles, their air force, all destroyed. They ground down their active forces. There was talk of, some people talk of between 191 to 250,000 casualties that Ukraine suffered. So Russia beat the Ukrainian army. So anybody who said that 200,000 Russian troops was insufficient to the task of defeating the Ukrainian army was wrong. The Russians did it. It's a done deal. But the NATO reconstituted the Ukrainian force. And that's what we saw in September. We saw a new reality is around 30 to 40,000 fresh Ukrainian troops, organized, trained, equipped, led, commanded, given intelligence by NATO. Now, prior to this counteroffensive that we're talking about, I think it would be safe to say that Ukraine had a military that was trained and equipped by NATO. But the military that carried out the counteroffensive was a NATO army manned primarily, but not exclusively, by Ukrainians. And that's a qualitative difference. So we have a completely qualitatively different force coming in to carry out this attack. Now, why September? Phase 2 started in around March 25th. And the first part of phase 2 involved the primary focus was on the capture of Mariupol, completion of the land bridge. And, that went through April, that got into May, but they finally accomplished that task. And then the troops that were involved in that moved on to carry out attacks, in Lugansk and Donbass. They had to expand and defend the Kherson bridgehead. The point I'm trying to make is that there's a little bit of a pause from phase 1 to phase 2, but not much. But let's just say from April, May, June, July, August. I'm a Marine, so I have to do that. April, May, June, July, 5 months. Hey, I'm pretty good. If it was 6, I'd have trouble. I'd have to use 2 hands. 5 months. There's not a military in the world that can sustain offensive operations for 5 months. Check out history. It doesn't work that way. Check out the recent American invasion of Iraq in 2003. We had to pause before Baghdad. They call it the Karbala pause. We moved up. Why did we have to pause? We outran our ammunition. We ran out of fuel. We had to stop and have everything catch up so that we could have fuel and ammunition. Because what happens to tanks when they move forward, they run out of gas? They stop being tanks and they start becoming coffins. So, even the vaunted American military, after a few weeks, had to pause to refit, refuel, re-equip. It wasn't a big pause, but we had to take a pause. The Russians were doing this heavy fighting. You don't engage in combat that kills 500 to 1,000 enemy a day. Let's put it another way. The Russians were firing 60,000 artillery rounds a day. During all of Desert Storm, the United States fired 60,000 rounds. So right off the bat, 60,000 rounds means you have a lot of artillerymen doing a lot of work every single day. The infantry historically, the number of small arms rounds that have to be fired to achieve a casualty, it fluctuates, but it's in the thousands. You have to fire thousands of rounds before one bullet hits target. So just think about it. If you're killing, 500 to 1,000 Ukrainians a day, that means you're also wounding, 3 times that many. The amount of action going on, the amount of shooting, the amount of artillery, combat that's going on is intense, hugely intense. And combat is stressful. I mean, you are literally stressed out the whole time. Guys are nicotine freaks. They're drinking coffee. They're not getting any sleep. Their eyes are red. Just, you want to know what combat's like? Get some sand, put it in your eye, and rub it. Okay, and there it is. And then stay awake for like 3 days, listen to the loudest music possible, and do push-ups and sit-ups, go sit in the rain, pour cold water on yourself, sit in front of a fan from the air conditioning, freezing, do anything that just makes your life hell. And you do that for 24 hours and you've experienced 1 day of combat. These guys have done it for 5 months on both sides. I mean, I'm not minimizing what the Ukrainians are doing. They're the ones getting killed. But my point is, you have to hit pause for a second. Even the vaunted Chechens, Mr. Tough Guys, the big-chested Chechens out there, and I'm not making fun of them. I admire them. Even the Chechens had to hit pause. They sent all their guys home for 30-day break. And that's what happened in July. Russia went, we got to hit pause. We've been pushing these guys too hard. Pause. And then during the pause, Russia said, while we rest and regroup, we need to prepare for the autumn offensive. So while we pause, we're going to pull some units out of the front line, get them re-equipped, reorganized. We're going to build these new battle groups ready to launch this attack, etc. This means that you've lost your initiative. In combat, it's I know I'm throwing a lot of things out here. I hope I'm not confusing you at all, but you know John Boyd. You've heard of John Boyd, yes. Colonel John Boyd, Air Force guy, fighter pilot. I forget what they called him, 30-second Boyd or 13-second Boyd, whatever. But he basically said, put me in an airplane, put you in an airplane, fly at each other's nose to nose. And once we hit break, I'll shoot you down in X amount of seconds. Because he would initiate a series of maneuvers that were designed to have you reacting to him every time. And once you started reacting to him, he would get into a position where he could shoot you down 100% of the time. And it's called the OODA loop. Orient, let's see, OODA. Observe, there it is, the first O. Observe, orient, decide, act. In maneuver warfare, the Marine Corps adopted OODA loop and the Boyd's theory in our maneuver warfare thing. I was part of that. I was very proud of being part of the intellectual time, a great intellectual time of the Marine Corps where maneuver warfare was brought in. But one of the things is you want to get inside your opponent's decision-making loop, their OODA loop, decision-making cycle. If you can execute the OODA loop tighter, in a tighter circle than your opponent, they will always be reacting to you. And then, like Boyd said, maneuver, they're done. Russia owned the OODA loop for the summer of 2022. They owned it. And then they hit pause. And that's the danger of a pause. Because when you hit pause, the OODA loop resets. And whatever advantage you had, whatever spin you were getting, you lost it. And now that doesn't mean you can't regain it. But that's what Russia was trying to do by resting, reequipping, etc. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, remember, now we have to stop talking about Ukraine. NATO, on the other, because that's who's now fighting this fight. This is a NATO war against Russia. 100%. They're using Ukraine as a de facto NATO army. In fact, Ukraine is a NATO army today, a NATO military. It's more NATO than virtually any other NATO force. And it's better than any other NATO force. Let me just make this point. Those 30,000 Ukrainian troops that they just put on the battlefield that beat their head against the Russian defenses and took over Kharkov, if you took those 30,000, put them up against 30,000 Germans, they'd wipe the board on Germany. Put them up against 30,000 French. French wouldn't stand a chance. There's not a single military in NATO, with the possible exception of the United States, that could stand toe-to-toe with the Ukrainian military, this new Ukrainian military, and win. That's how good these guys are. They're good. They're combat hardened. You never know until you actually go to combat how you're going to perform in combat. Germany might have some really tough guys, but I think they're pretty soft. I think they've been eating a lot of Wiener Schnitzel, drinking a lot of beer, schnapps. They enjoy going to the what do they call it? The
beer garden.
The beer garden. The name of their bars, the Hoff or something like that. But again, I'm getting old and senile. But they enjoy their life. They're not hard troops. They're not. They're soft. The French troops, they got some hard guys. Most of the French guys are soft. The British, they're pretty hard, but their military is just pathetic. It's shrinking to the point of it's like Benjamin Button. There's nobody who has a hard military. Even the United States is becoming increasingly soft because we've lost whatever edge we had from combat in Afghanistan and Iraq. The Ukrainians are all hard. They're 100% hard. So are the Russians, by the way. But my point is this is a very good military with very good intelligence. They have the totality of NATO's intelligence. And here's the other point. NATO gets to operate its intelligence collection platforms without fear of any interdiction. In combat, that intelligence satellite we have floating right over Ukraine, taking all the happy snaps they want 24/7, wouldn't work. I'm just telling you right now, if NATO actually went to war against Russia today, all of these systems would shut down. Most of them would be destroyed, or the other ones would just be jammed. Other ones would never get off the airfield. So NATO has this, they're living in this fantasy world where they're getting the perfect intelligence picture because Russia can't do anything to stop them. So the Ukraine army is getting perfect intelligence about the Russian order of battle, everything. So the NATO army now / Ukraine knows the Russians have hit an operational pause. They know Russia has withdrawn certain forces. They have the complete layout of the battlefield. And so now they also are aware of Russian doctrine. I mean, you know that the Russians, when they defend, they're supposed to defend over a certain frontage. They're supposed to defend in depth. There's certain identified reserves that will respond to any counterattack, et cetera. And so when they look down, they say, here's the system. What do we need to do? The number one, if you evaluate, there's 3 primary fronts that you have to talk about here. Kharkov, Donbass, and then Kherson. Of the 3, which one poses an existential threat to the Russian posture? It's Kherson. If you take Kherson, you threaten Crimea. End of story. Kherson must be held at all costs by the Russians. They can't give it up. So over the summer, while Ukraine was building up their forces, remember Zelensky, I got a 1 million-man army. We're coming to Kherson. We're going to drive through and take Crimea. Everybody talked about Kherson. We're going to take Kherson. Don't hold that referendum in Kherson. We're coming to get you. Crimea, you belong to us. We're coming to get you. And so the Russians responded to that, and they kept Kherson pretty well defended. The initial Ukrainian offensive operations were against Kherson. Now, there's a difference between a feint and a diversionary attack. A feint is, if we're boxing, I'm going to feint. I'm going to try and get you to, I'm going to fake a punch. You're going to move, and then I'm going to come in. I'm going to feint, hit you, feint, back. But a diversion is, I'm just going to come in and start beating the crap out of you. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going to get you to totally focus on me. And then someone else is going to come in from behind and knock you out. But it doesn't work that way in boxing, so it's not a perfect analogy. But the point is, the feint, you don't commit. The diversion, you commit. And the Ukrainians did a diversion attack for the purpose of fixing the Russians in place in Kherson. And by pressing home the attack, because the important thing about a fixing attack or diversion attack, it has to be believable. If you're just in there tickling somebody, they're not going to believe that you're actually coming in to bear hug them and strangle them. And the Ukrainians made it believable. They committed to the attack. They came in hard and they lost a lot of guys. Some people, we don't know what the true casualty figures are yet because the Ukrainians aren't releasing them. The Russians aren't releasing, proof. The Russians say on the first day, 1,700 dead. Probably a little bit exaggerated, but not too much. I mean, you can count destroyed vehicles, and nowadays the Russians have drones overhead and they're taking photographs and they can count the bodies. And so I'm not going to say that's too exaggerated. I think the Russians are closer to the truth than not. What we do know is that the Ukrainians had to have, basically an endless line of ambulances taking the wounded and injured out of the battlefield, thousands. But the Ukrainians pressed the attack. They attacked. They didn't stop. They kept pressing the attack, pressing the attack, pressing the attack, pressing the attack, up to the point that the commander in Kherson said, I need reinforcements. And the Russians went, release the reinforcements. And the strategic reinforcements were released. They come in to Kherson and they commit to the fight. So now we have a classic fixing attack. You've attacked the existing defense. The reserves come in. Now you fix them. You grab them and you hold them close. And it's tough, man. You're getting bleed. You're getting cut, whatever. But you hold them. The Russians can't go anywhere right now. They're fixed. And in military terms, that sets up another F word that we're not going to use. You fix them, you find them, you fix them, and then you finish them off. And now the Ukrainians release the Kraken, so to speak. I don't know how large it was, 20,000 troops that they used up north, but they release them. And they release them having evaluated, because Kharkov was the weakest link. I talked about Kherson being the first. The Donbass was the second. Donbass is politically important. You want to liberate. That's what this whole war was fought about, to defend these people, liberate these people. Plus, the Russians are continuing the offensive here. There's a group called Wagner, and they never stopped attacking. Everybody else on the front line said, we have to hit a pause. And Wagner said, stick the pause where the sun don't shine. Keep going, boys. Keep going. And it's a different quality, qualitatively, psychologically, a different group of people is Wagner. They're professional contract soldiers. They work for the Russian Ministry of Defense, the general staff, but they're not regular army, so to speak. They're contract. Russia has a military system that's based on the combined. You have conscripts, and then you have contract soldiers. In the United States, we call contract soldiers volunteers. But the Russian contract system is different from the American volunteer system. We get people to volunteer, they're raw recruits, etc. Most contract soldiers have already been through basic training. They were conscripted at one point. Some of them stayed on for several years. They already did a contract in the paratroops or whatever. And they come back and they sign a contract for a fixed period of time based upon their skill and experience. But when you sign up with the airborne unit or with an armor unit, there's legal constraints that the Russian government has on how they can use it. Wagner is designed to be a contract vehicle without legal constraint. And so it's uniquely funded, but it's a unique Russian entity. A lot of people are saying, well, it's like Blackwater. Not at all. Blackwater, you can't win the Congressional Medal of Honor if you're working with Blackwater. You're a civilian, private military contractor, but you're not in the U.S. Army. Wagner guys get Russian state awards for heroism that are designated only for the military all the time because they are military. It's just a different contract vehicle. These Wagner boys, they're down there, they're fighting, they're hooking and jabbing. They don't stop. It's just a different mindset for these guys. So the Russians are continuing this offensive in the Donbass. Even during the pause, they're still grinding away. But Kharkov up north, they went into full complacent mode. They just went, we're hitting pause, we're pulling out some. Up north, they had two of the elite offensive formations in the Russian military, the 1st Guards Tank Army and the 20th Combined Arms Army. These are organizations with a long and glorious history dating back to the Second World War. They were involved in the final assault on Berlin, killing the Nazi beast. During the Cold War, they were in East Germany. These were the vanguard of the Soviet forces that would drive through and take the Rhine. And then when the Cold War ended, they were withdrawn, and Russia went through that period where they redefined their military, reorganized their military to focus more on the brigade than the division or corps, because nobody believed there was going to be a large ground war in Europe anymore. So they went to the brigade size, et cetera. But around 2016, the Russians realized that NATO, there was a possibility they'd be fighting NATO. So they reconstituted these formations. They are purpose designed to fight NATO. They only exist to fight NATO. That's all they're supposed to do, which means they're designed to receive the NATO attack, halt the NATO attack, and then launch a counterattack that destroys the NATO attack. That's the doctrine. And trust me, I just spent the whole week refamiliarizing myself with Russian doctrine. I've got all the old FMFMs, and this thick. I read them from top to bottom. My eyes hurt, just to make sure that I'm right when I talk about this, because that's what these two units do. They haven't been allowed to do their job. I mean, the special military operation put some constraints on them. They were involved in the feint on Kiev. They've been up in Kharkiv. And they actually didn't perform very well. There's some of the regiments, got in head-on engagement with the Ukrainians, came out on the losing end, losing equipment and men. There's been some questions about these two units, probably because they've never been allowed to be employed doctrinally. I mean, again, I don't like to bring up boxing too much. But if I fight with a left foot forward stance, and I train, and someone says, okay, time for the match, right foot forward. What? I don't do right foot forward. I mean, this is supposed to be my jab. Now this is my jab. I haven't practiced that. And that's sort of what happened to them. They had to shift their whole way, and it doesn't work. But they can defend. I mean, that's not a problem. When a Russian unit defends the division, and there's 3 divisions in each one of these things, that's 6 divisions, as a 20-kilometer frontage. Depending on, terrain will dictate, but generally speaking, it's about 20-kilometer frontage for a division. And they break it up, and then there's about 15 to 20 kilometers in depth. So you pretty much have a 20-kilometer by 20-kilometer box. That is a division. And so when you have the army, it's sort of the equivalent of a NATO corps. You'll have 3 of those. You're not going to put all 3 on front because you have to have 1 division in reserve. You always have a reserve. So 2 on front, you're talking 40-kilometer thing with the 20th combiner, 80 kilometers of this. So you need more forces. But my point is, that's how they're doing. But it's too big of a frontage, not enough troops. So you start spreading things out. Now, that's okay if you got all your artillery. And believe me, these combined arms army have a lot of artillery. And so, because the artillery, they form what they call fire kettles. That's the space between strong points. You put out obstacles. The enemy comes in. The idea with your obstacle plan, your defense plan, is to channel them in, and then they get destroyed with artillery. Doctrinally, it works great. And after you disrupt them, then the reserves come in, pinch off them from the back, and kill them all. Doctrine's amazing. It looks great on paper all the time. Every time I do a PowerPoint presentation based upon doctrine, I win. But the reality changes that. These guys lost a lot of their troops to be reorganized, re-equipped. They created giant gaps. And they normally, let's say I have a Marine rifle battalion on the front lines. It's time to replace it. I want to replace them with something like a Marine rifle battalion, even if it's an Army rifle battalion. That's okay. Army rifle battalion. National Guard rifle battalion. Okay, I can even use a National Guard rifle battalion because they're sort of the same thing. LAPD SWAT team. Ain't the same thing. Rifle battalion, SWAT team. Not the same thing. I mean, Sesame Street could put on a show about one of these things is not like the other, and the SWAT team is the one that jumps out and says, we're not like anybody else because we're not designed, equipped, organized, trained, carry out combat operations on the front line, the forward edge of the battle area where enemy tanks and artillery and armored personnel vehicles are going to be hitting us first. That's what the Russians did. They put SWAT teams on the front line. They put militia units on the front line. They put Interior Ministry troops on the front line. And not only that, they didn't do it doctrinally. So the gap between these hard points was made longer. Sometimes it was 5 kilometers between one strong point and the other. And then that whole defense in depth thing I talked about, they didn't do it. So 20 kilometers behind the SWAT team, there's nothing, 0 empty space. That's okay, because the Russians have all that artillery. They'll just suck them into the empty space and blow the crap out of them, except all the artillery's gone because they've taken it to Donbass so they can achieve that 10 to 15 to 1 superiority as they grind them down in the defense. There was nothing there. And NATO, with their perfect intelligence, knew this. They knew everything. So when they attacked at the point of